Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Move for a Movement. I have with me today Erica Hornthal. She's a board-certified dance movement therapist. She does a lot of advocacy work, which we'll discuss. She has several published books. She runs a Facebook group called Dance Therapy Advocates, and she has a YouTube show called Dance Therapy Dialogue. So check that out. We'll get all into that. Based in Chicago, Illinois, just outside of, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, northern suburbs. Sure, I always say Chicago.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming today, for joining us, Erica.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. How you doing in these unprecedented times? Put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I feel like even that phrase, we've been saying for, I don't know, like almost a year now. And I'm definitely not in the camp of like, I'm done with it, so it's over. I mean, I'm still very much, I think, in the same place as I was a year ago in terms of just acknowledging where we are and what's going on. But psychologically, I think sometimes I'm just like, really, we're still here? Oh man. I wake up and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go out and get stuff done, and then reality kind of sets in. I'm like, no, you're gonna get stuff done at home. Like, okay. The weather's not been so great in Chicago, so it's okay, because I look outside and I'm like, it's all right that you're not really going anywhere. So Mother Nature's like kind of giving you a little incentive to stay in. So
stay cozy.
Yeah. So that's been okay. And I'm sure, like other viewers, I'm doing the whole like e-learning, hybrid, kids at home, like everything's happening at home. So I think almost a year later, I can say we're managing it, but I'll be really happy when we can explore the outside a little bit more.
Yep. And it's sort of, we can't really compare it to anything else we've experienced in our lives. Yeah. Like, it's apples to oranges to anything else we can think of.
Yep.
But that could come with growth. New things come with growth. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I know that I feel like 2020 and 2021 has hardship in so many different ways. I don't know that anybody's like, oh, it was the best year ever. But I think there are several silver linings, and it feels like if people are willing to go in and kind of look for the opportunities for change, that really was the catalyst that was needed for that, so whether it's with my clients or myself, like just noticing that when we allow ourselves to slow down and really reflect, because sometimes either we avoid it or we actually have the time to do it, it can be beneficial, so I don't want to, again, minimize or certainly, reject the fact that like there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of sadness that's happening all over the world. But I think you're right. Like, we can actually use this opportunity to better ourselves and, to better the world around us. So we'll see. Hopefully things continue to move along, pun intended. And I don't know, just kind of taking it one day at a time and trying to be present to whatever comes up in the moment. So.
I love it. 100%. So moving into some of your advocacy work, as I mentioned, books, dance therapy dialogues, dance therapy advocates group. I'm wondering why you, as a dance movement therapy practitioner, are really drawn to go above and beyond in that way, to do that advocacy work. If you could speak to that.
Sure. To be completely open and transparent, it actually, I think, came as an afterthought, to like some of the, just at the heart of it, to a lot of the angst and frustration and probably anger that I was expressing sometimes, and really harboring. So let me elaborate on that.
Mm.
I'm not the first person to feel this way. I won't be the last. And I think it crosses genres, like sometimes just in the field of somatics in general. But again, I'm going to speak for dance movement therapy. There was just this feeling of, how come more people don't know about this? Or why
Yeah.
do I feel like I'm explaining myself over and over again, or validating myself,
Yep.
It was really frustrating when people minimized it, or kind of, oh, that's fun, or that's got to be the best job. Yes, it is, but not because I'm dancing and having fun all day. It's because of the impact that it's having on clients that sometimes have no other options. And I don't know, one day it kind of just clicked for me that I could either spend more, if not my entire career, harboring these feelings, right, of being angry and almost like resentful sometimes, or I could take that same kind of energy and put a positive spin on it and fuel it, use it as energy to do
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
something more, like you said. And that's kind of when that word advocacy popped up. And it gets misconstrued, I think, because everybody has their own way that they advocate. That could be
Yep.
advocating for a certain population. It could be advocating for a certain voice or
Right.
literal color within the field of dance movement therapy. The
Mhm.
way I've always viewed advocacy is just for the field itself, right? Like, how can we get dance movement therapy not a phrase, right? A common household profession. How can people know to search for it? How do they know that
Mhm.
it's going to be an option for them if they're not a dancer and they're not really a mover?
Yep.
Um, and that's really where that piece of for advocacy came from. And the interesting thing is, I now see that reflected in more like up and coming therapists. Maybe they're still students or newer
Mhm.
professionals, where maybe on online platforms, I'm seeing some of the frustration that I had and noticing, like,
Mm.
ooh, yeah, that I can resonate with that. I still feel that. I hear where you're coming from. And there's going to be a point when you might get tired of that. And I noticed that some people kind of jump ship. It's like, I'm done with this. I'm going to pave my own way, create my own business, dot, dot, dot. Or what's some way that we can really stand behind this field and get some more visibility for it? So for me, it's been a way of life. It started with the fact that, like, if I don't do this, I don't have a career. If I don't educate people on what it is, my business closes, because I chose to put the words dance therapy in my business name. Rightly, like,
Mhm.
I did that on purpose. I wanted to
Mhm.
create
Mhm.
visibility.
Mhm.
But that's come with hardship, and so for me, well, now it's okay, but at first that came with a lot of, walls, and um, that also has where that advocacy piece has really stepped in.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah, and I've thought about this here and there, following my training in dancing with therapy and then deciding to kind of take my own route, jump ship in a certain way, as you referenced young professionals in the field. Um, Dance movement therapy, it's not like you can give this person this same treatment that you can then do in a longitudinal or like gigantic study. It's in so many ways it doesn't fit into this scientific kind of model that insurance companies validate. And therefore bleeds out into culture of like, this is what we believe has efficacy.
Mhm.
um, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't. And I think what you're doing with your work is that voice of saying, hold on a second, that what this is really powerful if y'all can take a second to look a little deeper.
Right. Yeah,
um
yeah. And I think for me, it's also the authenticity, right? That authentic piece. Like, there are plenty of us that go to school, right? We get our degree, and somewhere along the way, I think there's a shift. It's kind of like, I thought this is what I wanted. I'm still going to use this, right? I'm going to use this knowledge that I've gained and create my own career path out of it. And I think what I'm seeing a little bit more of is individuals who do want that title, for lack of term, right? They do want to have that practice or private practice, or like you said, insurance to bill as a dance movement therapist, which does in some instances, but again, with a different licensure or an additional license. And I got really kind of depleted and down seeing so many people just like have their balloon popped, of I put so much money into this and this is what I really want, but my state doesn't recognize it. My, town doesn't know anything from it. And it's not me wanting to throw the towel in, but it's kind of, like you said, a little bit like society kind of rejecting it and being like, we don't understand. We don't really know any different. We're not going to dig any deeper. And so you need to conform to us, not the other way around. And that just felt, I don't know, it felt wrong for lack of a better term. Like I just wanted people to be able to like proudly take that degree. And again, if they want that, to really own, like, I'm a dance therapist, this is what I do. And if more people know about it, then I can continue to practice in a way that feels right for me.
Yeah, it's definitely a different approach. I'm going to push it forward versus no thanks. Like, this is too hard, which I commend.
It is. Yeah, it is hard.
People like you that are taking that other approach. And I sort of don't put anything in the camp of right or wrong, but we can look at what the effect is.
Right. Totally.
Yeah. So I'm curious also to veer a little bit from there. You do have ties to the dance art world, I'll call it, concert dance studios. For instance, you write for Dance Informa. That's how I got connected with you. So I'm curious about your thoughts. So there's dance movement therapy over here, and then there's dance art, concert dance studios, competitions, and all that. Obviously the two fields have different goals and they have different processes. It looks a little different, though, it's all based in movement. I think about, I'm curious your thoughts, how the two fields can work together a little bit more, can learn from each other, in really fruitful ways. Because I do see that divide in a way. I think there could be a lot more connection and, working together in fruitful ways. Wondering if you could speak to that.
I could try, sure. I mean, I think it's interesting enough, especially since we started talking about, 2020, the pandemic. I didn't really feel myself very tapped in as a dance therapist to the dance community until 2020-ish. I've been writing for Dance Informa since I think 2018. So obviously that was before, COVID and everything. But because it felt like for the first time, many dancers who were out and about could not perform. They lost their jobs. And some still aren't performing.
Right.
All of a sudden it was a very real, like, whoa, when dance is taken away from me, my mental health shifts. Maybe it doesn't change, it changes. Maybe it's not permanent, I should say. Maybe it's not a complete like depression, but I was hearing from a lot of dancers, I'm feeling confined. I'm confused. I'm, almost sometimes like disoriented, right? Like body wise, not really sure where I belong, where I am, who I am, a little bit of an identity crisis, because if everything is about our art form and we take it away, what do I do? So it was interesting that, companies like Capizio were, looking for online classes to take place. And I just kind of took a chance, right? Saw it as an opportunity of like, well, I see you're doing a lot of dance classes. Are you doing any movement for mental health? Are you doing any like, not just mindfulness or yoga, but really looking at the way we move our bodies so that we can be more attentive to how it impacts our mental health on a daily basis, especially since we're all home and Zooming, So I feel like for me, up until that point, they were very separate. I'm a dancer at heart. I was never a professional dancer. And while a lot of dance movement therapists were, or still are, it's not necessary to do the work. But I feel like the two, it's interesting, right? Because there's even a part of dance movement therapy that kind of rejects the dance piece. We
Uh-huh.
feel like it's too niche, or it overshadows things, or it complicates things, and so movement is the way to go, right? All
Right.
movement.
Yep.
I feel like in the dance world, it's better, but they kind of reject, that's a hard word, harsh word, but mental health in a sense, right? That wasn't necessarily front and center. And then as
Uh-huh.
dance
Right.
therapists, here we like really prioritize the therapy and the mental health and sometimes downplay the dance. Not everybody, I understand, like that's not going to resonate with everyone.
Uh-huh.
But like on either side, things get diluted. And so for me, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, where can we meet in the middle? You know, can we
Uh-huh.
look at dance as more than an art form or more as aesthetic? And can we look at therapy as less than clinical? You know, does it always have to be so diagnostic and
Uh-huh.
scientific?
Mm-hmm.
And is there some way to just kind of bridge those gaps? And then on top of that, understanding that both at the heart of it come from the inherent need to move. You know, I like
Mm-hmm.
we all have that. We all need that. Some of us just take it a step further and actually have a skill about it. You know, like we are able to contort, move, uh, you know, flow, gyrate, whatever word comes to mind, our bodies in a way that other people can't. And then it becomes, in a sense, entertainment, beautiful to some, um, intriguing. And there's, again, the kind of like an entertainment quality about that, you know, and that is not dance movement therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's room for both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think also for me, like that's why I love to talk about this and write about it and I guess advocate for it also because there's so many opportunities for bridges. Like let's bridge the
Mm-hmm.
gap. Let's see where we can all work together. Outside of the fact that like dancers could even use dance movement therapy. That hasn't even been the focus for me. It's just like, do you know the power of movement? How else do you use movement? So I think there's lots of potential there. I'm not the first, like, there are people already doing that work. So I don't want to say like it's not happening. Um, but it certainly isn't something that, again, like society knows a lot about. And especially the dance world. Like, the more dancers I come up to now, I hear, oh, yeah, I've heard about dance therapy. I thought about it, or maybe I'll think about it when I retire, kind of thing, as opposed to before where it was like, I've never heard of that, or what is that? Did you make that up? Or, oh, I don't want any part of that. You know, like I dance and I don't want to use therapy in conjunction with that because that might change the way I perform.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, that this could change me as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say I have heard that as well. I'll tell people about my background and younger dancers. Oh, I thought about that. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
And you pointed to this could get so deep of like we all need to move, but in Western culture, like the dualism, and this is something that if you're in school for dance movement therapy or in that world, they talk about so much of like Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am, the body and the mind, and there's no connection where we know they're so intricately connected and you can't disconnect them.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they are disconnected, then that's not good for your holistic health as a human.
Right.
Um,
It's like even when they are disconnected, they're connected, right? Because if you're
yeah,
ignoring your body, that plays a role on your mind, whether you realize it or
right,
not.
right, right,
So,
right, right.
right, it's like
Very
ironic
right.
how that works. Yeah.
Mhm. And some of us take dance classes or we perform. Some people do tennis or they play basketball. Like there are these outlets for our body. And then there are dance movement therapists that are saying, let's use this connection, this inherent need to move you forward as a human,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether it's physically or mentally, emotionally, for this very specific condition you might have, let's approach it that way. Um, and I think that that's sort of a key in advocacy of like, we all move. This
Right.
is so much a part of us as humans. Like it's how we evolved, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's use that to move you forward as a human,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that the dance world could be a huge player in that. right? Because the dance world understands how powerful movement can be, right?
Yeah.
And you were speaking about those shifts in the dance world as well, of like maybe we are going to pay attention to our dancers' health, holistic health. If we notice they're down today, maybe, as a rehearsal director, you go, hey, what's going on?
Right.
Starting and I'll get into this next, of getting into those roots of able. There we go. Apologies. I do see those shifts happening in the dance world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think dance movement therapy could be a player there.
Yeah.
And in the same way that, saying the dance world could be a player for pushing dance movement therapy forward.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, awesome. I know. I think there's more overlap than we realize. Again, we both have to, obviously dance movement therapists know about the dance community, but not all the dance community knows about dance movement therapists, So again, the more advocacy, the more education, the more outlets that we can, learn from each other, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was also thinking about this tool, this capability of a person as a human to really understand their body, to have that facility of like, this is how I move, and I have an instinctual, or like, this is a capability I have, right? Dancers develop that as they train, right? Dance movement therapists develop that in a way through their training.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, there are so many athletes have that, right? There are so many ways for humans to benefit from that facility of just understanding what their body can do, right?
Yeah.
Better understanding. I almost feel like it's an endless well, right? But getting into that better understanding.
Yeah.
There are just so many different paths, right? And that's, again, I think that's what dance movement therapy and dance art, I think they are exploring that in a way that culture isn't connected to broadly, sadly.
Yeah.
I think it's getting better, but
I agree. I mean, it's definitely shifting. And just kind of seeing where it goes. I think it's interesting that it's kind of being repackaged in a sense. It's like, here, we don't have enough movement, so let's sell it to you in ways that, we used to do thousands of years ago, but we kind of don't do anymore. And so let's put a little shiny bow on it, and you can pay for the subscription, or somebody will tell you how to move or show you how to move, as opposed to like, what are ways that you're already moving, what are ways you used to move, and how can you do those for yourself? It's it's like selling the cure for something that we created. Right, like yeah,
in the same framework of the thing that created it.
Right. Like, what was I was writing about social media and well, technology in general, but like how it's impacting our bodies, which impacts our movement, which impacts our minds. And it was funny to me that, kind of ironic that people are like, oh, I really need to calm down. I need to meditate. I'm going to go to the platform that actually causes a lot of the anxiety or the reason I need to meditate and use that to help me meditate. So it's like, I'm glad that those exist. I'm glad that people are being more mindful with what they need. But it's kind of ironic, right? That like, here's a device that kind of has created more anxiety, and now we're going to use that device to help ease the anxiety. It's kind of a vicious cycle.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And bringing in that discernment, right? Which I know just as me as a yoga practice, I've connected to that of like, okay, there's this pose. That's not great for my body. So I'm going to find a modification, and that being a journey in yoga practice. And just engaging with the body in general, I think that can be a major benefit. So getting more in tune with your body, and then there's a certain shift in your mind, and then comes a discernment of like, okay, hold on a second. I'm using the same tool that created the anxiety to cure the anxiety. I'm going to think about that for a second.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, as you're talking, it makes me think too of just the difference in how my body moves versus how I can move my body safely. Like, how do I move my body, period, right? Like, how far can my leg go? How fast can I run? Versus how fast can I run while still being present to what my body needs? You know, like I call it, it's a mixture of things, but I kind of said the word one day and then it kind of stuck with some of my clients, but I used the word perspection. It was a misword, you know. It was like I meant to say perception, but I also wanted to say interoception, introspection, and it just like all morphed together. And so sometimes we're like, oh, perspection. You know, it's like,
awesome.
Can I be aware of what I'm doing and the implications it has while I'm doing it? You know, can I be aware of my body and my mind while I'm engaging in new or familiar movement habits? I don't know. It's kind of still a work in progress, but I feel like that word came out for a reason, and that's actually something we use, or I use with my clients. And when you're doing it, it clicks. You know, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I understand. Different perspection, yeah. I don't know. I have to like define it and see where that goes. But yeah, it's not just about moving our bodies, but can we be mindful as we're moving our bodies and then notice the changes that happen?
Yeah. What state am I as a unique entity, as a living being in the world? What state am I in? And then in that state, how am I reacting to the world around me? I think there's so much there.
Yeah. And you know, paying attention to how I move in that dynamic, or how when I move that shifts. So that's kind of been my thing. My big thing is, you know, there's so many books and articles and you know, media sources out there about like why movement's beneficial. For me, it's really been about like going back to my own roots as a dance therapist and recognizing just like the qualities and the nuances of our movements and how we need to become aware of them. Once we know them, we can kind of sift through what works and what doesn't, and we can actually adapt and change those nuances, change those characteristics or qualities to change our lives.
100%. Love that. Yeah, referenced it a little bit, but we're at this point in culture where, you know, this summer and George Floyd was murdered, and then, you know, Black Lives Matter is not a new thing, but really this uprising, and then all these questions in general of like, yeah, there's a lot in society we need to question. There's a lot of, you know, the way we do things in Western culture and these preconceptions we have. Yeah, not great.
Yeah.
And I see you really engaging in that conversation, you know, publicly through social media. Follow her on social media, everyone, by the way. She's got some great gems of wisdom to share. You know, questioning the ableism and the racism and the sexism and all these things, the water we swim in, right? I see you engaging in that conversation. So I'm curious how that is for you, if that was a conscious choice to really enter in there. Is it organic for you? Why has that been important to you? Perhaps to engage in that conversation? And then also, how have you seen any impact of that, like perception of people, you know, followers, or, you know, in your circles? There's a lot of questions, but just sort of, if you can speak to that, however you're drawn to.
Sure. So, I mean, right off the bat, the first thing that I can say is it is not authentic. And I think that's my starting point, because that's where a lot of the conversation started and where it continues to go. You know, in my own lens, my own, you know, privileged world life, I knew that there were injustices. I've received injustices of my own, and yet I wasn't even aware of, how do I put it, the heaviness, the weight, the severity, I guess, of how deep so much of this oppression is going, or has gone, or continues to go. So that was one, right? Like, it wasn't that I was choosing not to see it. I don't ignore it, but I don't put myself in those situations, or I'm not in an environment where I'm seeing them on a regular basis.
Right.
So that being said, there weren't really a lot of platforms specifically for dance therapists to have these conversations. I know that they were happening behind closed doors, and like, these weren't new conversations, but they were to kind of like the vast majority, just kind of everyday dance therapists going, getting their graduate degree, again, maybe similar to my circumstances, not really questioning things, learning what they needed to, and then moving on in the world. Again, privilege. So what happened was, on Facebook, the group that I manage, really important questions were popping up, and I wasn't able to answer them. I mean, that's not my job as an administrator of a group. I'm not supposed to have all the answers, or I don't think I'm supposed to have all the answers. But what was happening was just so much hate, misunderstanding, miscommunication, harm, anger. I mean, you name it, the emotions were flying, right? And so I think at that point, I recognized I have work to do. I want to be present to this community, but I can only do so much because I haven't had the right education either. And whether that's in the field of dance therapy specifically, but also just as a human, and my own education system kind of failing me in a sense, because while I got a degree and I got a great education, I wasn't made aware of the injustices throughout history. I wasn't encouraged to take Black history because it was not part of the curriculum, right? It was a, what's the word I'm looking for? Elective, right? And it shouldn't be an elective. It should be something that's taught to everybody, It should, I mean, it's history. It's American history. It's not just Black history. So things that I was blind to, again, intentional or otherwise, I'm learning not to be. And so that's been a really, I think, a good growth experience for me, but it certainly has been uncomfortable, as it's supposed to be. Finding people who you can engage in those conversations with, and knowing when a boundary has been set to honor it. And that was really hard for me as well, especially online, because it's like, let's keep talking, let's engage. Why did you misunderstand me? I didn't mean that. All of these, like, sometimes what we call like the white fragilities, in a sense, coming up, whether that's what was meant or truly what was happening. It was just very eye-opening, right? And then among the pandemic and like all of the life stressors that we're already enduring. So for me, it's been really important to kind of ride that wave, and I don't want it to be something that just goes away. I realize that, like, I have to be careful with how I bring those conversations back up and interject, because there's still so much harm there. Still so much like raw, open wounds. But it has been lovely to see how our community online is showing up for each other, and I feel like now we're in a place where some people disengaged because they needed to, and perhaps will stay that way, right, to keep themselves safe, while others are kind of coming in and wanting to see how we can build and grow the field together, move from this point forward, not like, well, this happened in the past, so this is how it will always be. Or what's the word I'm looking for? Like, not that, it's so hard. It's like not forgetting about the past. We need to honor what happened, but not holding everybody accountable right now for what happened 50 or 60 years ago, because so many of us weren't there for it. And can we just say, like, that wasn't fair, it wasn't good enough, and we're going to do better going forward. But we can't do it alone. We have to do it in community. So that's what was hard for me. It was like, I felt like eyes were kind of turned toward me at some point, and I was like, whoa, I want to be there for you guys, but I have a lot of learning and unlearning to do. And so I really needed to step back, and kind of still have stepped back in some ways, trying to like do some behind the scenes education and really aligning with people that can help me see other points for what they were, not as a reaction, not as a personal attack. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, it's brought up a lot of thoughts for me personally. But this idea of when to listen and when to speak, engaging with the body, I think is a way to learn that, right? Engaging in movement, communities that are engaged with movement, right?
Yeah.
When do you, like in, for example, the rehearsal process, when do you go, okay, yep, and when do you say, I got an idea? And I was also struck by that boundary you're saying, learning when it's time to say, okay, if you need me, I'm here, but okay, that's where you are, and I respect that.
And that's hard it's hard for me anyway, because I feel like there's no closure. It doesn't always feel amicable, which it doesn't need to be, but for me it felt like it needed to be, like let's part on good terms. For me, the real unfortunate part was that a lot of these conversations took place online, and that's not really where we should be having them. That's where they can come up. Let's pose the questions and say, like, how are we supporting our, our BIPOC community members? How are we supporting Indigenous cultures? How are we supporting, our Asian Americans? How are we allowing their voices to be heard? Or how are we perpetuating the minimizing of those voices, even within our own field, versus what are we going to do about it? Let's open up this dialogue and have a huge conversation online where tone is not taken into account, where we can't really openly communicate because we don't know what's happening on the other end. It makes me think of, totally out of context, but if anybody watches or has ever watched Key and Peele on Comedy Central, they have a great, I don't know if you ever saw like the text message skit that they did, where like one is like,
I think a while ago. Yeah.
Hey dude, what's up? And he's like, not much, what's up with you? And then he's like, want to go do something? Whatever. And the guy's like, whatever, like he starts reading into this context that isn't even there. And they end up meeting at a bar, and one's got like a machete or something, like waiting to, proverbially like, attack the guy. And the other guy's like, hey man, good thing. I'm so glad we could do this. He's like, oh, and like puts the weapon away. That's really how it felt. It's like you have one person saying whatever and the other person saying, yeah, whatever, that sounds good. So it was like people were saying the same thing, but the tone was completely different. And so one person would be, like, this is so great that we can have a respectful conversation. And the other person was like, glad we can have a respectful conversation. It's like the tone was not there. And so many of these amazing conversations just were really stopped in their tracks because of the miscommunication. Not to say that those things didn't need to be said, but again, online forums are not necessarily the place to have these really, really in-depth conversations, because it happens in relation. And relationship, while it's there on social media, it's a more superficial, right, kind of connection. It can feel a little bit more one-sided too. So it's really taught me to take those conversations off of social media, and that's come with a lot of feedback, for lack of a better term, as well, right? Like, you don't want to have these conversations, you're too good for these conversations, they can't be present here, so you have to take them somewhere else. Like, that's not my reality, but if that's what you see, I understand. So it's, it's difficult. And I really honor people that have these conversations for a living, whether you're a white ally, whether you are, a darker skinned individual, like whatever your background is, these conversations are not easy. And, reading books like My Grandmother's Hands or, Oppression in the Body, like people that really put their life's work into this, it's not easy. And I can only imagine the toll that it takes on your body as well.
One of the things I was thinking, we were speaking before, I'll come back to, but, and what is the solution there? Where else do we have that? Well, you have a summit like you did this summer where you can at least see people on Zoom. I can see you leaning forward and like the expression on your face, and those little things can make the complete difference in what the communication is, like you were just describing. And until we can get together in space again, that's something. And that's also where the learning can happen. We can speak to each other because we can learn from each other, and coming to it with, okay, now I'm going to listen, and now I'm going to offer what I think and what I feel and what I know.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I feel like I could talk about this for a long time, but just to speak to that point, it was like, for me, listening online wasn't possible. It felt impossible because it meant not saying anything. And then it was kind of like, well, why aren't you saying anything? Like, where's your comment? Why aren't, and so I was like, I can't do both. I can't listen. I mean, I can, but can I give myself permission? Like, while I'm in the listening phase and while I'm listening, you're not going to see a lot of comments from me, but realizing that doesn't mean I'm not engaged, and that's been really hard too, of people are going to assume or make assumptions based off of your quote engagement on an online platform, which is usually seen as how often you comment, how often you like. They don't know. It's like we need another level on social media where like it's just a set of eyes. Like I'm watching or I'm paying attention. I'm not liking, I'm not commenting, I'm present. Like we need a present, like a little present icon that just says like, this is how many people are present to this conversation, but aren't commenting, don't have something to say or don't know what to say and don't want to react to it. They just want to follow it. They just want to be present to it. That's missing from social media. So
I was thinking also before of the power of that nonverbal communication, like just the power of like the eye contact. Like it's been said a million times, but facing you directly versus like I'm over here.
Right.
100% difference in the communication. And it's like we all know it without putting the name to it, that like the power of the body in communication and how we go through the world. It's right there. We all know it, but we don't recognize it in that way. Right.
Yeah. And, just taking it into, again, kind of this idea of like how our movement impacts our communication. So I think back to like almost a year ago when a lot of this was kind of really coming to the surface. We were under lockdown. Most of how I was interacting, especially on an online platform, was on my phone. And when I'm on my phone, like here, I'll use it as an example, right? My world is much smaller. For me, it's very direct. It's very intense. And that was coming out in my responses. It was an emergency. I needed to get to it right away. Kind of the frenzy of like the scrolling, and the, this. Instead of when I'm actually having a conversation with someone, my whole body language changes. And while I felt like, maybe things were like coming at me on my phone, I was like this, I was like, I must push into this. I must keep talking to this. When I'm in person with someone, I notice that I actually lean back. It's a very different dynamic, of like, whoa, okay, you have the floor, you get the space. I'm gonna move back a little bit. That doesn't happen for me on social media. I'm learning to do that now. Like I'm learning to put it away, put it down, not comment right away. But for me, it really started in my body. How do I notice that I show up on social media, and how does that literally in my body and impact how I respond? And I didn't know that until I really slowed down and was like, whoa, what are you doing? Like, this isn't you, really, right? Like, this isn't you in person, but you're not going to have these relationships or these conversations with these people in person. So how do you stay true to who you are and then have it reflected on your online forum? and it's still a process. They don't really know what that looks like. I just know what I'm doing to try to change that.
So funny you name that, because I was thinking about doing that as my master's thesis when I was studying dance therapy at Leslie, of like, especially young people, you know, the millennial generation, Gen Z, of here I am with my phone. What does that do to my experience versus I'm out looking at the world?
Yeah.
This body language versus this.
Yeah.
I think dance movement therapy could do so much there that could be really impactful. And I hope to see that happen. I don't know if anyone's working on that. And also, like we were saying, like, how much does society listen? But I think there's a lot there that could mean a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I was starting to write on that, and I was like, oh, let's see what research is out there. There isn't. There's a lot of research on social media and mental health. I think there's even the beginnings of social media and just posture, functional movement, right? Like our thumbs, arthritis, eyes, vision, that kind of stuff. I was not able to see or find tangible articles about how our movement using social media is playing a role in our experience and in our mental health in particular. That's not to say it's not there. I hope people are working on it, but there isn't a lot of readily available research. And I think you're right. Like, that's where an entire book at least could be written on that. Because it is changing our society. It is changing the way we relate, the way we respond. And I don't think it's about like getting rid of that, but if we don't know we're doing it, we don't know to be aware to change it, or to say like, whoa, let's rewind. I'm noticing this happened because I'm engaging on this platform. Can we get on a phone call? Can we meet in person? Or can we at least Zoom? Like, can I see you? Because I think that will make a difference. And by the time I realized that so much damage had already been done, that people were like, I'm not going to talk to you. I'll be damned if I'm going to look at your face. You know, it was like, no, that's never going to happen. And that was really hard, you know, especially for me, who tends to be a little bit of a people pleaser. I'm like, oh, everybody must, you know, I just want everybody to be happy. But part of 2020 and 2021, that's like been a huge growth for me. And again, just wanting to create a space where people can have those conversations. And I can think at the heart of it, recognizing that because those conversations weren't safely happening in an open forum, they came out somewhere else. You know, it was like, we need to talk about this, and there's no censorship here, so we can say what we need to say when we need to say it. And I was not prepared for it, which is okay, but you know, it's really forced me to kind of look inward and be like, all right, what do I need to know? How can I better myself? How can I create more awareness around you know, huge themes: equity, diversity, inclusion, racism, privilege.
Yeah. And that discomfort, right? Like, you named the white fragility of, like, if you're BIPOC or you're marginalized in some way, you know, that's part of your experience, is that discomfort. And people with privilege aren't so much used to that, right? But what can be found in that discomfort, that it's like you got to move through it, right? I was listening to a Brene Brown podcast. I love Brene Brown, but speaking about emotions are a tunnel, right?
Yeah.
Exhaustion comes when you get stuck in the middle. You get to somewhere, you have to move through the emotion. It just has to be moved through, right? So you move through, or you get stuck, and then there's that emotional exhaustion, right? And perhaps that's part of the experience of marginalization. You're just, because that these things from culture, right? These stimuli, I'll say, these effects on you all the time from, you know, the marginalization, you're stuck there. So there's this exhaustion.
Yeah.
And where do people of privilege come in? Maybe we can be part of moving you out of that tunnel. You know, we move you out of the tunnel itself by taking away those forces. I think that was the word I was, that's, and I don't have the answer. I don't have the, but this is the conversation. I think these are the questions that we need to be asking.
Yeah. Yeah. And how, what role do I play in creating that tunnel? What role do I play in keeping the tunnel there? Or how can I maybe remove the tunnel, or like you said, help somebody through the tunnel? Or if it's not even helping someone else, not assuming, how do I want to put this? Like, recognizing how easy it is for me to move through the tunnel, and how like I don't have any traffic on this end. I don't know what you guys are experiencing, but it's easy for me. So have a good day. It's like, can I join the traffic? I don't know. Can I sit in the traffic with you? Or can I bring you over to my side? I don't know. There's so many different ways to look at it, but I appreciate that metaphor, right? That idea of like moving an emotion through a tunnel. Yeah.
Movement. it's
I know, like that's the whole thing is like movement can be such a metaphor for everything. It's not. I joke, but it's like we've forgotten how much movement is a metaphor because we don't use those common phrases anymore. Like we don't hear, oh, pain in the neck or bending over backwards or, now we have emojis. I don't think there are emojis for those. So we've even taken like how we move, describing how we move in our language kind of out of our language. So we're just, more disconnected than ever.
Interesting. Oof. Yeah. You referenced 2020. So sort of veering off a little bit. I'm wondering how you might have seen your clients' needs change. How, is as much as you can speak about, sort of in considering confidentiality and your comfort. Your position as a clinician, as a therapist in this time. We know, especially with people who are not privileged, people who are marginalized, it's been a really tough time. And that can, of course, show up when you're working with someone in therapy. I'm wondering what, again, as much as you can speak to, how you've seen that shift in your practice.
Yeah, I mean, well, one, it was interesting because as a lot of these big themes, like especially around, race, social injustice are coming up, I found some of my clients really needed to talk about it. And so not only was it like, hey, let's talk about this, but let's also talk about the fact that our experiences are different. Does this feel safe? Can you talk about this in a therapeutic relationship with a client who, sorry, not a client, with a therapist, right, who either has a different background or you see as having more privilege than yourself, does have more privilege. So I say that because it's like, am I the right person? We need to make sure that we're supporting our clients. And if all of a sudden the therapeutic relationship doesn't feel safe, feels threatened or invalidated, it's on me, I feel, as a therapist to make sure that you have the support that you need. So, is it about changing therapists? Do you need extra support in that avenue? While other clients who maybe do meet, certain, that's not the word. While there were clients that identify maybe within those marginalized communities, they didn't want to talk about it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but that wasn't what came into therapy. And even me kind of approaching it or asking was kind of like, that's not what I want to talk about right now. Okay. And if this is still feeling safe in our relationship, then we can continue, right? So it was a lot of like maybe referring out or helping find a therapist that supported that client's need to identify with the harm and the racism and the injustice and the marginalization, where that might not have been something I was capable of, or it might have been a limitation, either from my perspective or from the client's. And then on the other side, clients of all backgrounds just needing to talk about what this pandemic has done, changing again of that identity, the anxiety, just, the confinement in the body, which just brings up so much anxiety and discomfort and agitation. So as hard as it was for me to also be on a virtual platform, because I love to be in person, I love to move, I want to see your whole body, which isn't always possible. It was also about trusting that like we need movement more than ever. And let's get back to the basics. Like, what are ways that we can start to use movement to help manage all of these things that are coming up for us during the pandemic? So it was really eye-opening, I think, for all of us. You know, I remember having a client that was just so frozen, you know, because like everything had become about this small space. You know, it was like, my therapy is on Zoom, my 9-hour day is on Zoom, my kids are on Zoom, like everything. I never leave my apartment. I moved, so I'm in this like tiny studio bedroom, or, you know, I just don't feel like I have any space. Like all of the above, it was just really, really minimizing our own experiences with our movement. So I think that's why I actually turned to so many resources. Like I started writing down things that I would normally give my clients in person. Why I started writing so much. I created this workbook, which turned into a book. It just felt like I need to get this information out somehow so that people really understand why movement is so needed right now. And it's not just about getting on Zoom and taking a dance class, because that was actually contributing to a lot of the burnout. It was interesting to say the least, but I think on the other side of things, it's really, really solidified why movement is so needed.
Like even just BP before pandemic.
Yeah, right? That's going to be a thing now,
you have your even your
2020
commute
BP.
Your commute or walking 10 minutes to the store and picking something up, like that experience of our bodies moving through the world and how much that is a part of health, perhaps, and like what it does when then that's not there. And just underscoring the importance of embodiment right there, right? It's just like being in the world and having that expansiveness through your body, however that might be, being so necessary versus like, here's my little, which, you know, you named and your clients brought to you. Yeah.
You know, I'm not
and I was
no, go ahead.
I was, when we were speaking about racial justice and that coming up before, I was thinking about, and it relating back to that of this experience of marginalization in the body, or, you know, say you're a young Black man and you know that, you know, there's a cop or there's a rival gang or like, and this curling in of the body and for safety, right? Ta-Nehisi Coates in Lord, I forget the book, but when he was speaking to his son, it's like a prolonged letter to his son. I read that and it just struck me of that experience in the body. And earlier on, or, you know, when the racial justice uprising over the summer, I was thinking about this breath and inhale, exhale, and I can't breathe. And the kind of larger picture of that, of like having that breath and that taking in, and that the balance of energy and rest, and like that being in the breath. And when you don't have that, you know, when you don't have that healthy take in energy, let it go, because this is your experience when you're protecting yourself, what that does, right? And what's the effect on a larger scale of that?
Right.
And and all that to say, really, I think movement is really poised to make a difference there, right? You know, such a big difference.
Well, and even as you're saying that, like, I mean, I remember when that idea was a kind of first posed. So I think it was at the summit last summer. Dr. Amber Elizabeth Gray. It wasn't intentional, but like she ended up opening up the summit, right? And it was very much about like, you know, how breath is taken for granted. It's not easy for everybody to breathe. 2020 being the year of the lung, you know, the year of breath, and just noticing. And if you can breathe easy, then send that breath to someone who can't. I mean, that was really impactful. And as you're talking, like that makes me think, like we know that certain health conditions are more prevalent in certain communities, right? Certain populations,
Yeah.
but it just like, oh, why is there research done on that? Like, I mean, yes, there's research done on that. Let me say, is there research done on how constriction of breath contributes to these huge health shifts later on, right? And then generationally, because I think I mean, I know I'm not the first person to say this, but it's a new thought to me, you know? And so again, having these conversations allows these new thoughts and awarenesses to pop in, but it's like, no wonder some of these populations have generationally seen certain diseases, because it's not just stress, right? Like people say, well, racism has caused stress causes more heart disease. Okay, it's not just stress. Now you're talking about how your actual movement has been changed throughout generations. When you are walking around, like you said, more closed in or more on guard or more, quote, protected because you don't know what's going to happen, that impacts your breath, the capacity for your breath, which impacts everything else. So again, I'm probably not the first person to say this, but I just feel like it needed to be said, because I was like, whoa, I never made that connection. All I know is what I see statistically, right? Black people have this, this statistic, Asian Americans have this statistic, teens that, like, we're all numbers. But if we start to actually embody or understand, like on a body level, why that's happening, I think it changes our relationship to it. So thank you for bringing in that example, and then just kind of the heaviness, the weight of when we constrict something like our breath and it's not changeable, like that becomes the new norm, all of the ripple effect that plays on us, but then also on our future generations.
Yeah. And it's these are, in a way, questions, right? And in art, that's like the exciting thing, is like leaving with the question.
Yeah.
In science, that could be the frustrating thing. You want the answer. And talking into the discomfort we were talking about, like leaving, like sitting with the question, like, what is your experience of that? What can you learn from the discomfort?
Yeah.
So many things, so many questions.
Yeah.
But starting to wrap up, is there anything else you want to share? Feel free to plug your books. Anything else? Definitely, like I said, follow Erica. She's got some gems of wisdom to share.
No, I mean, this was an awesome conversation. I wasn't, I probably, colleagues or like identify as white. I'm sure there are a lot of other white women out there that are afraid to talk about race, or, just afraid to kind of talk about their own experience around it. And so I think having whatever conversation we can about this, whether it was an intentional conversation or not, like, so beneficial. I think it's good to sit in that discomfort, and manage our own emotions as that comes up, or noticing like, oh, maybe this wasn't as uncomfortable this time, but it's been how many months of having these conversations, so normalizing that feeling. I think we covered a lot. So I mean, people can certainly follow me. I feel like those gems of wisdom, as you call them, tend to come out more on Instagram, at The Therapist Who Moves You. I'm on Facebook, so if people are interested in learning more about dance therapy or advocacy, our dance therapy advocates group is the place to go. And publication wise, things are still in the works, so I don't have a book to send you a link to, or a link to send you to find the book, but the book I'm working on will be coming out in the summer of 2022. And I have a course that I'm working with on Human Kinetics, which is an academic publisher. Should be coming out, I believe, this fall, but it's mostly for academic resources. So it's actually for like a K through 12 curriculum. The idea is if we can get the administration and the staff understanding why body awareness is so important for mental health, then we can trickle it down to our students and start to teach some of those basic body movement for mental health interventions in the classroom. So that's also a work in progress. But I share tidbits and like the wisdom, I guess, that I share comes from those. So as I'm writing, I kind of think of something. I'm like, ooh, I think this is interesting. What will a bigger group think, or what comments might people have that informs where I go as a writer. So I kind of put them out on Instagram to see what conversations we can spark. And then obviously if people are interested in the summit, it will be this year, June 11th through 13th over the summer. It's all virtual. And as information becomes available, there's a website, dancetherapysummit.com, where people can get, up-to-date information.
We'll put all those links, and I'm looking forward personally.
Yeah, it was great last year. So I think this year is just going to be even better. So
yeah. I know, fingers crossed, I'm trying to self-publish a book for spring of 2022, but it's probably going to be summer 2022. So we'll be book buddies.
Yeah, it takes so much time. It's, that's a whole podcast in itself.
Yeah, I've been researching for since probably May, so almost a year now.
Yeah. It's been exciting, but it's definitely intense. And then I look at like the books that I have on my bookshelf, just knowing that like, wow, everybody has gone through this experience in their own way. It's kind of like amazing, but also very humbling at the same time. So a little scary, but yeah, well, I wish you the best of luck with that, because it's no small feat for sure.
Same.
Thanks.
All right. Well, we could probably talk all day, but you're a busy lady, got a lot going on, so
you too.
I'll let you go.
Okay. Thanks so much, Captain. This is great.
Yeah. Back at you. Thanks so much. Great conversation.
Yeah,
thank you everyone for joining. We'll put links, everything to follow Erica and what she's doing. Please like, comment, subscribe, spread the word to people you think this conversation would resonate with, and we will see you next time. Thanks so much, everyone.